Hello, today I will tell you about a very tragic case of a boy from England. On Valentine's Day in 1993, 4 children went to the railway tracks to look for a football they had kicked away, but instead they discovered 2 strange objects. Out of curiosity, the children approached closer, but as they got nearer, they sensed something was wrong. They saw that one object was partially covered in a blue coat, while the bottom part lay bare on the tracks. It became clear that it was the body of a child. Terrified, they immediately screamed and ran away from the scene. The body they had just discovered was that of the main character in today's case, James, a 2-year-old who had been missing for 2 days. Forensic examination revealed that the boy had endured unimaginable torture before dying. Furthermore, the perpetrator had placed the body on the railway tracks to stage a fake accident. What happened that year? Returning to 1993, Liverpool, a port city in northwest England, is one of the 8 key cities in England with a population of 520,000 and is also the capital of Merseyside. It was once a famous manufacturing centre in England, and today's story takes place right here. James Patrick Bulger was born on March 16, 1990 in Liverpool, England. He was a boy with deep blue eyes, like the sea, and golden brown hair that highlighted his young face with an innocent and adorable smile. His mother, Denise, took great care of him and always brought her precious child everywhere. This was because years earlier, Denise had lost her first child during pregnancy, so she didn't want anything unfortunate to happen to her second child. On Friday, February 12, 1993, at 2:30 p.m. Denise went to the Strand shopping centre with her son James, who was then 2 years old. Like all children his age, he was full of energy and mischievous everywhere. He never sat still, which made it difficult for Denise to concentrate on shopping. She feared that if she let her guard down for a moment, the child would run away. An hour and 10 minutes later, they arrived at the butcher shop on the ground floor of the shopping centre, which was their final stop for the day. After buying the meat, they were ready to go home, but it was at this point that Denise made a decision she would regret for life. She left her child at the butcher shop, thinking that there was no queue at the checkout and they would quickly finish. However, the shop owner mistakenly mixed up the order, causing a delay of a few minutes. Occasionally, she looked out the door and saw James playing with some cigarette butts on the ground, so they didn't think much of it. But when Denise finished paying and stepped out of the butcher shop, her son had vanished. Her heart sank, and she immediately began searching for him in all the stores. At that moment, James was upstairs, being led away by one child, while another guided the way. They were quickly leaving the shopping centre. Denise was extremely worried, her heart ablaze, as she rushed to the security office, describing her child's appearance and clothing in detail. The security staff issued a missing person announcement, but as time passed, the announcement continued to repeat for half an hour with no sign of James. At 4:15 p.m. Denise called the Marsh Lane police station. For cases involving missing children, the police naturally take them seriously, and they immediately mobilized a significant search effort for the boy. James's parents, Denise and her husband Ralph, were summoned to the police station for questioning, because looking back at the history of such cases, many parents have been the perpetrators of the disappearances. Thus, they became the first suspects. However, they were quickly cleared of suspicion. After failing to find James, the police reviewed the surveillance footage from the shopping centre that day. They saw footage of James being led away by 2 unidentified children. This was a crucial lead, and they believed the suspects were teenagers, so they investigated whether students from nearby schools had skipped school that Friday afternoon and were over 12 years old. After some investigation, They indeed found a teenager who closely resembled the image in the surveillance video and brought him in for questioning. Meanwhile, the police posted numerous missing person flyers, and even the evening news reported on the case. Before long, the police received many calls from witnesses. Some said they had seen the boy in the neighborhood with two other children, while others reported seeing James being beaten by the two kids. However, they thought these were just family disputes and did not intervene. Some even claimed to have seen the three children near a canal. The next day, a large number of police officers went to the canal area to search. They even attempted to drain the water from the canal, but found nothing. At this point, Denise had been at the police station for a full day and night. When she learned that her son had been led away by two other children, she felt somewhat relieved, as it is generally more dangerous when children are abducted by adults. However, her despair soon overwhelmed her. On the morning of Sunday, February 14, 1993, a railway engineer saw an object resembling a doll on the tracks. However, he didn't pay much attention since children in the area often placed objects on the tracks. That afternoon, 4 boys went to the railway tracks to look for a football that had been kicked away. These children, around 10 years old, discovered the body of James. The upper body was covered with a coat, while the lower body lay bare on the tracks. How could these 4 children accept such a brutal sight? They screamed and ran away from the scene. The police quickly cordoned off the area, and the forensic staff stated that this was the most brutal case he had ever handled in his career. James had died before being struck by the train. The perpetrator had placed his upper body on the tracks while leaving the lower body exposed, resulting in the body being cut in half when the train passed. The perpetrator clearly intended to stage the scene as an accident. At the scene, 27 blood-stained bricks, a can of blue paint, a wire clamp, and 3 batteries were discovered. It seemed that the perpetrator had tortured the boy to death right there. According to the examination results, the victim had 42 wounds, with many concentrated on the head. The left eye was covered in blue paint, and the lower body was bare with obvious wounds. Finally, a 22-pound, about 10 kg, iron bar, which was a piece of railway track, had fallen on the victim. James suffered a fractured skull due to the trauma from being struck on the head by the iron bar. With so many wounds, it was impossible to determine which one was fatal. It is hard to imagine what kind of monster could commit such cruelty against a 2-year-old child. Additionally, there was another important clue. James had a bruise on his face. The police suspected that this was an injury caused by the perpetrator kicking him in the head. If a matching shoe could be found, the perpetrator would be caught. Currently, the most urgent task was to identify the 2 children who had led the victim away in the surveillance video. They surely knew something. News of James's death quickly spread throughout the city, and people spontaneously went to the railway tracks to lay flowers in memory of this lovely child. However, it wasn't long before the mood shifted from sadness to suspicion and outrage. After a preliminary investigation, the police suspected that the perpetrator might be a pedophile and that the 2 children could be accomplices. Despite the news being widely reported and the police publicly releasing the surveillance video early on, these 2 children could not be found. The teenager, who was thought to resemble the person in the video, was brought in for questioning, but was quickly cleared and sent home after a brief interview. However, the public's anger had nowhere to go. They disregarded everything and insisted that he was involved in the case. Not only did they criticize him, but they also smashed windows of his house, threw eggs at him and his family, and even threatened to kill this innocent family, forcing them to move away to escape the area. On February 18, an anonymous woman provided crucial information to the police. Her friend, Susan, had a 10-year-old son named John, who closely resembled the boy in the surveillance video. Furthermore, on the day of the incident, John and another troubled boy named Robert had skipped school, and when they returned, their clothes were covered in blue paint. That morning at 7:30, 4 police officers knocked on Robert's door. When the police asked to take Robert with them, he immediately burst into tears. A child who had never been in such a situation would naturally cry. However, the police inadvertently noticed the boy's blood-stained shoes and immediately recognized that this child was definitely related to the case. In another development, Susan, Joan's mother, also admitted that her son had skipped school on Friday and produced a jacket covered in blue paint. All the officers were facing such young suspects for the first time, so they chose a friendlier approach to start. During the interrogation, Robert appeared calmer than the other children his age. He always evaded questions, and his statements were vague and half-true. But he inadvertently revealed a detail. Robert not only said that they had met James at the shopping center that day, but he also placed all the blame on John, claiming that it was John who had kidnapped the child. When John was interrogated, he was very frightened, constantly crying and shouting that he hadn't kidnapped or killed James. His mother, Susan, appeared aggressive, causing the boy to be terrified. The police had to pause the interrogation and leave the room, leaving Susan with her son. In fact, this mother frequently used violence against John. Being beaten was a regular occurrence for him. Whenever his mother was in a bad mood, he would be punished, and he would also be beaten for making mistakes. This caused him to develop a habit of lying and being unable to admit his faults. But this time, both Susan and John were crying and hugging each other, with her promising that no matter what he did, his parents would always love him. 2 hours and 47 minutes later, John calmed down and decided to tell the truth. With John revealing more details about the torture of James, the police finally confirmed that they were dealing with the youngest murderer in British history. John admitted that the idea of kidnapping the child was his, but the idea of killing him was proposed by Robert. Robert painted James's face blue, continuously throwing bricks and stones at him, while I just kicked lightly. I even tried to stop Robert. No one could assess how much of John's testimony was true. However, thanks to his statement, the interrogation of Robert made a significant breakthrough. The police told Robert that his friend John had revealed the truth, placing all the blame on him. Upon hearing this, Robert, who had previously maintained his composure, could no longer hold back. He admitted that he had participated in the kidnapping of James, but denied killing him, providing a rather interesting argument. If I wanted to kill a child, why wouldn't I kill my little brother first? At this point, the two children continuously blamed each other, and the case reached a deadlock. A crucial clue in the case was the injuries to the victim's genital area and the 3 batteries. After the autopsy, many injuries in the lower body were found after the clothing was removed. This meant they had taken off James's pants early in the assault, and the police suspected the 3 batteries had been stuffed into the victim's mouth and anus. However, when the police asked about this, both were hesitant, crying, and showing anger, and ultimately the police could not extract any information, so they could not determine whether they had abused James. Nevertheless, based on the testimonies of the 2 children and witness statements, the police reconstructed the sequence of events in the case. On the afternoon of February 12, 1993, John and Robert skipped school again. They went to a shopping center to steal, taking advantage of the staff's inattention. They pocketed anything they could find: batteries, candy, pencils, paint, dolls, toy soldiers, and so on. They even discarded some of the stolen items. The act of stealing itself seemed to be the main thrill. When they grew bored, John suddenly said, "Let's find a kid. I haven't beaten a kid in a while." Robert, instead of stopping him, excitedly replied, "Let's make the kid get lost. Maybe a car will hit them." Showing no hesitation, they began searching for a victim. They soon found two young siblings walking alone and successfully attracted their attention. Fortunately, their mother was nearby and chased John and Robert away. However, shortly after, the mother discovered her son missing. Worried, she asked her daughter where her brother was. The daughter replied, "He went with those boys." The mother immediately grabbed her daughter and ran out of the shopping center, calling for her son. Luckily, she spotted John and Robert leading her son away. She caught up to them, and John, surprised by her speed, gave up. After their first failed attempt, they returned to the shopping center and saw James sitting alone in a butcher shop, playing with cigarette butts. James, innocent and unsuspecting, became their target. Initially, they didn't intend to harm him, just leading him around. Soon, James started crying and wanting to go home. Perhaps annoyed, they took him to a canal, intending to push him into the water. But after lifting James, they didn't throw him in, but dropped him hard to the ground. He cried out in pain, sustaining a head injury that caused swelling and bleeding. Frightened, they ran away, but soon returned, covering the wound on James's forehead with a coat before continuing their aimless wandering. Many people noticed the three children. Passers-by said they saw James being beaten by the two older boys, but didn't intervene, assuming it was a family matter. At an intersection, James suddenly ran off and almost got hit by a car. Robert grabbed him just in time. Tired from walking, they rested on the grass by a reservoir. An elderly woman saw James crying and noticed his injury. Concerned, she asked what happened. John and Robert lied, saying they had just found James and were taking him to the police station. Reassured, she directed them to the nearest station. Instead, they immediately took James in the opposite direction, ignoring the woman's calls. They quickly disappeared from sight. They then encountered a woman walking her dog. She also expressed concern for James's safety, but they continued to lie. Another woman with a young girl joined the conversation, repeatedly asking questions, which annoyed Robert. He let go of James, but John sternly ordered, "Grab him." Facing the women's concern, John insisted they were taking James to the police station. However, the woman with the girl sensed something was wrong and wanted to take James herself. She asked the other woman to watch her daughter while she took the boys to the station. The other woman refused, saying her dog didn't like children. They missed their chance to save James. As evening approached, no one paid attention to James's injuries anymore. John and Robert met an older boy they knew at a church. After playing for a while, the older boy noticed James's injuries. Robert lied, saying James was John's younger brother. As they prepared to leave, the older boy, clearly worried, warned, "If you don't take him home, I'll beat you up." He then let them go. At 5:30 p.m., the police station was right in front of them, but they made a cruel decision. They took the victim to nearby train tracks. John ripped off the coat covering James's head, apparently feeling no need to hide anything anymore. They undressed the victim and brutally beat him. This inhumane act lasted until about 6:30 p.m. They threw bricks at him repeatedly, trying to knock him down until he could no longer stand. Instead of running away, they placed James on the tracks, covering his face with bricks, and left. No one can explain why they lingered until evening before committing their cruel act. If they truly wanted to kill him, there were other feasible options along the way. It is known that some audio recordings were deemed too brutal to be released by the police. The victim's genitals showed signs of assault, leading some to speculate that this was a sex crime. But would 10-year-old children truly understand such things? Since both remain silent on this issue, their motives remain a mystery. After James's death, the two went to Robert's favorite video store. But unexpectedly, Susan, John's mother, arrived and scolded both children. Robert ran home, crying and telling his mother that John's mother had beaten him, but he remained completely silent about what they had done that day, as if nothing had happened. After James's body was discovered, Robert brought a rose to place at the crime scene. When John's mother asked him if he recognized the boys in the surveillance video, John resolutely replied, "If I saw them, I would kick their heads in." Soon after, the police officially charged John and Robert with kidnapping and murder, along with another charge of attempted kidnapping. To protect the minors, the children's names were not initially released during the investigation, but the case's impact was so significant that people quickly recognized John and Robert in the surveillance video. An angry mob even risked imprisonment to make them pay the price. Both families were forced to move house in the dead of night. Due to the case's special nature, after confirming the children as perpetrators, the police thoroughly investigated their backgrounds. Since John had been a child, his family had been violent. His father frequently beat his mother, and his mother became addicted to alcohol and frequently beat her children with sticks and belts. Robert was the fifth of 6 children. Sibling rivalry and bullying were common. Robert's eldest brother, due to abuse, was placed in a children's care facility. Another brother became a professional thief, often taking Robert along for petty thefts. Violence and crime permeated the family, making them regulars at the police station. A psychiatrist's examination revealed Robert had a higher IQ than other children his age, and his calm demeanor during the trial led people to believe he was the mastermind. Of course, he was still a child with childish aspects. He liked collecting troll dolls and sucking his thumb. Every night, while sleeping with his younger brother, they would often suck each other's thumbs. When the police accused him of sexual abuse, he seemed more worried than John, perhaps fearing John would tell the police what he had done to James's genitals. Therefore, many believe Robert was primarily responsible for the crime. The audio recordings revealed John's confession of the crime. He said, "I killed James, not we or Robert and I killed James," leading some to believe he was the mastermind behind the murder. John's family situation was no better. His father was a frequently unemployed driver, constantly changing jobs and suffering from depression. His mother, Susan, frequently scolded her children for minor things. His parents constantly argued and threatened divorce, repeatedly separating and reconciling over the years. John's older brother had a cleft lip and his younger sister had developmental problems. Both were sent to special schools. Compared to his siblings, John's squint was not serious. However, he was often mocked, and whether to gain more attention, John became increasingly strange. Initially, he would shake his hands and make strange noises in class. Later, he began to self-harm, banging his head against walls and cutting himself with scissors. Because he was too difficult to manage, John was transferred to Robert's school and held back a year. He met Robert, who was also held back, and they began conspiring together, turning from victims into bullies, frequently tormenting other students. In addition, John's house contained many violent horror films, including Child's Play 3, which shares some similarities with this case. The villain is a doll, similar in size to James. It is also attacked with blue paint and ultimately defeated and dismembered. However, there is no direct evidence to suggest John was influenced by this film. At 10:30 a.m. on November 1, 1993, the trial began at Preston Crown Court, conducted as an adult trial. They sat in specially designed raised chairs and faced judgment. Robert stared at the ceiling, yawning, as if unconcerned, while John appeared anxious and remorseful. He occasionally looked at his mother, seeking her support. Because both defendants were minors, the prosecution had to prove they understood their actions. Their teachers testified, and a psychiatrist stated both defendants understood the severity of their crimes. The prosecution then publicly played the audio recording of the defendants' interrogation. Everyone was shocked by their cruelty and cunning. John and Robert also listened intently, both wanting to know how the other had blamed them. Notably, during the kidnapping and murder, an estimated 38 people saw them but did not intervene. These people were criticized by the press as heartless. They testified, and their testimony played a crucial role in convicting the children. The defense argued the children had no prior violent acts, only truancy and petty theft. This incident was a disastrous prank that spiraled out of control. If they had intended to kill a child, they could have drowned him in the canal or thrown him into traffic without wandering the streets for many people to see. Both John's and Robert's lawyers blamed each other, trying to mitigate their clients' charges. After listening, the judge said, "The issue isn't where the murder occurred, but whether they premeditated killing James on the train tracks." Finally, on November 24, 1993, after many days of trial, the judge told the two boys that their murder of James was extremely cruel and brutal. "I believe your conduct was both cunning and atrocious, and you will be detained awaiting the Queen's judgment." The Queen's judgment refers to the sentence for juvenile offenders in England, which applies even to particularly serious crimes. This sentence usually only imposes a minimum term. For example, in this case, John and Robert were both sentenced to a minimum of 8 years in prison. After serving their term, if they reformed well, they would be released. The judge also lifted the ban on reporting and disclosing the perpetrators' identities, stating that the public interest outweighed the defendants' interests. This stipulation caused the case's impact to spread further, and many senior judges recommended increasing the minimum sentence to 10 years. Nearly 280,000 people petitioned Interior Minister Michael Howard to increase the minimum sentence. 8 months later, in July 1994, Michael Howard announced that John and Robert's minimum sentence had been increased to 15 years, but this decision was quickly overturned by the House of Lords. Judge Donaldson criticized, "What right do politicians have to arbitrarily interfere with the court's rulings?" Some also argued that putting these two children on trial as adults was unfair. In reality, the two were detained in different care centers, where they had access to books, musical instruments, and even video games, with conditions even better than their homes. Both suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, frequently experiencing nightmares, and were later given new identities and addresses upon release, granted the right to anonymity for life. In June 2001, after 6 months of review, the parole board decided that John and Robert no longer posed a danger to the public, and a few weeks later, the two boys completed their sentences and were released with new identities. This move naturally caused strong public dissatisfaction. In fact, many people have been convicted for impersonating John or Robert, and many have been penalized for revealing their whereabouts. James's mother divorced shortly after the 1993 trial and continues to this day in her efforts to revoke the killer's anonymity. The father publicly stated that he would always search for their whereabouts. Petitions to revoke their anonymity are continuously filed, with supporters arguing that citizens have a right to know if those around them are child abusers or pedophiles. Meanwhile, officials have repeatedly stated that if the two's anonymity is revoked, their lives will be threatened. After being released, Robert has dated a boyfriend and lived a hidden life, no longer participating in any criminal activities. John, shortly before being released at age 17, was accused of sexual relations with a female staff member at the care center. After his release, he became addicted to alcohol and drugs, downloaded child abuse images, and visited the crime scene. In September 2002, he was arrested for suspected involvement in a brawl, and 3 months later, he was found in possession of prohibited substances and placed under supervision. Afterward, he has had relationships with many underage girls and spent most of his time browsing the web and playing games. In February 2010, he was sent back to prison for possessing videos of child sexual abuse, having impersonated a 35-year-old married woman online to obtain more child abuse materials. On July 4, 2013, the parole board approved his release once again. Just 4 years later, he was arrested again, found to be in possession of thousands of child abuse images and a handbook guiding pedophiles on how to commit crimes and evade legal oversight. This time, he was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison and has twice applied for parole in September 2020 and December 2023, but both requests were denied. Perhaps the lack of family education and affection affected John from a young age, but after years of rehabilitation, he still poses a danger to society. Perhaps prison is the best place for him. The case will forever be a dark stain in British legal history, a painful reminder of the dark side of society and the fragility of childhood. The tragic fate of James, the unbelievable cruelty of John and Robert, has sparked an unprecedented wave of outrage and debate, raising agonizing questions about the responsibility of family, school, and society in nurturing and protecting children. John's repeated recidivism after release reveals the failure of the rehabilitation system and instills fear and unease in the public. Can human nature be changed? Is forgiveness the right answer for such heinous crimes? These questions remain unanswered, haunting the minds of those who have known the tragedy of James. This story is not just a simple criminal case, but a painful lesson about the loss of innocence, unbearable pain, and the ceaseless battle to protect the future generation from the darkness of crime.